right. Hi, everyone. My name is Thorne Stevens, and we're calling from the Brain Fitness One podcast. We're excited today to have a special guest, Mr. Tony Brink. Tony, how are you doing?
I am the best I've been, actually. Doing well. How about yourself?
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. I began the day with some mountain biking and then a cold plunge in the river at about 45 degrees. So,
That's the way to do it.
yeah,
Amazing.
pretty much my normal healthcare protocol when I'm here in Colorado, anyway. So,
Awesome. I just finished a FST fascial stretch therapy session just before the call, so I am
okay.
loose and calm. Feel
Yeah,
good.
I would love to hear more about that. I've been doing some fascial work for quite a while, and it's definitely some of the secret sauce.
Oh yeah, it's totally game changing and highly intentional. A lot of these FST specialists are just engineers of the body, and for them to kind of find what's going on and fix it without it being excruciatingly painful
Hmm.
is it's mind blowing. It feels good. Sometimes there's pain along the way, but
Yep.
a little bit of pain to reach that efficiency. But I definitely recommend checking it out. And there's FST specialists all over the country.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's how many days a week do you do FSD?
Depending on my ailments, probably once every other week. If I have something going on, I'll go weekly.
Yep.
So it
Wow.
really just
Yeah.
depends if I'm beating on myself too much in the gym or not.
Well, fantastic. So, really excited to dive into your story. I personally found it very inspirational as I've gotten to know you over these last number of months. So, to introduce you first, so Tony is a eight-figure Amazon seller, importer, distributor of raw materials, and also an investor. Expertise in global trade and e-commerce. And then I'd love to start with just a maybe an overview of your TBI experience. So from my notes, I think that was in November of 2014, and how you really overcame the odds. First off by kind of diagnosing the event as it happened, but then coming back to it years later with additional data, and then coming up with your own healthcare protocol. But would love to hear about that. I guess before we jump into that side of the story, maybe just tell us a bit about your background. How'd you become an Amazon seller, and set the stage, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a bit of lineage of entrepreneurship throughout my family. My grandfather created his own business that kind of laid the foundation of success for the family, which is kind of cool and inspiring. And so, honestly, since I was a small child, I knew I wanted to do my own thing eventually and not work for someone else. So the plan was, all right, out of college, let's get a sales job, let's make some money, and then create something to do for myself. And so by the time I got to my first sales job, I was hearing a lot about Amazon, how scalable it is, how lean of a model it is, and I was super super curious because it's location independent. You can be work from your laptop anywhere in the world and be able to travel and not be in an office under fluorescent lights. And it was very attractive. And so what I did was I just took my first commission check and bought a bunch of random stuff from China and was off to the races, which at the time was a very risky maneuver because I had just moved to Chicago. I racked up a sick amount of credit card debt trying to learn this new sales job. It
Sure.
wasn't quite working out. When I got my first sale, instead of paying off the credit card, I put that $800 towards inventory.
Yep.
It was
Awesome.
really just a no fail attitude.
And what year was that?
So I moved to Chicago end of 2015,
Okay.
and in 2016 started selling on Amazon, experimenting and just taught myself the ropes along the way.
Yeah, definitely early into the market. I've also advised a firm who was actually one of the first Amazon marketplace agencies. So very
Okay.
familiar with that world, both on the business side as well as some of the private equity stuff I've done. So understand it. Yeah, really interesting. Definitely early in the game there. How did that then set the stage for where you're at now?
So the TBI happened the year before I moved to Chicago. And so during that recovery process that we'll get into, I became very fascinated with the body's ability to heal itself if given the right platform and environment to do so. And so I was really getting into, the health and wellness world. So when I started selling on Amazon, I was selling random knickknacks because I was just trying to find something that was super niche to make some money on. But then after 18 months, I actually had my first exit and I sold the first brand I started because it was things I didn't really care about and I wanted to focus on health and wellness, which is when I turned to selling supplements. And so I took every dollar of that exit, reinvested into new products in the wellness space, and have been focusing on supplements ever since. So it was really just, all right, let me learn this Amazon ecosystem a bit, make some money, and then reinvest that into something that I truly deeply care about. And that's these supplement brands I'm still running today.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, look forward to hearing about them as well. So let's talk about the injuries. So you said, so 2016. So what year was the injury?
2014. So that was November
2014.
2014.
Okay. November of 2014. Okay.
Right.
And then, yeah, would you mind just telling the story, please?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm originally from Minnesota. Obviously, cold winters, we all know that. And often you'll have black ice, and I slipped on black ice and hit the back of my head. So it damaged my cerebellum. I was cross-eyed and I wound up in the ER going into a mini stroke. So my vision went completely white. My face was extremely pale. My feet and legs were going numb and it was traveling up to my body. And so it could have been fatal, very bad. And all the TBI doctors were just like, this is very severe. You need to chill out. You can't really do anything. When you have a TBI or a severe concussion, you are not logical. Your judgment is not there. And so you try to function and operate as if it's a normal day because you want to be, a normal person. But any type of stimulus whatsoever, light, sound, even thought will be scratching the wound in your brain and it stops it from recovering.
Wow.
And so that's how I ended up in the hospital because after a couple of days of being at home on the couch trying to recover, I tried to just go outside and walk around and I just collapsed, mentally, physically. And so the initial week, I don't remember any of it, unfortunately. I guess I was repeating things that never even happened. My eyes were in the back of my head, and it was scary for my friends and family. So once the TBI doctors were like, all right, man, this is serious. You need to go home and sit still. I took it, to the extreme. And apart from going to the occupational therapy, the speech therapy, vision therapy, physical therapy, I was living in darkness at home for two months. So I was on a very strict diet, just fish, veggies, no caffeine, certainly no drugs, alcohol, sex, nothing that's going to stimulate my brain in any way.
And that was under the direction of the doctor, or where did that protocol come from?
So I was just really trial and error. The doctors basically said, go home and the less you do, the better. It was very like a blanket recommendation. And so with how dark and depressing and scary of a place it was neurological confinement. I was just kind of finding things that made my symptoms flare up and then wouldn't do them, which turned out to be everything.
Hmm.
So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to turn off and put myself on timeout, meditate through this during the day and sleep through that night. And every day gets a little bit better. And so, yeah, the initial process was like, all right, I'm finding out that everything triggers symptoms and you do a whole lot of nothing. And the less I did, the better I felt, which is very, very hard because your brain wants to find reason for what's going on and also go out and do things, but you can't do that because it just slows you down. So it's a very, very difficult, mind game while operating with a fractured brain to get through the process. So it was just, understanding my interoception of what's going wrong and responding to it. And also, another thing too, they put me on a couple different pills of drugs that I later found out would have stunted my recovery. When I realized that anything would bother me, I quit taking those right away because I had this gut feeling
Hmm.
that taking things that are going to mess with my neurochemistry would be bad for the recovery process. And at the time, I was not into biohacking. I didn't know anything about supplements. I didn't know anything about pharma. I would just take what the doctors tell me, but
Right.
something told me otherwise. And so I kind of followed that, light at the end of the tunnel of my mind. And it actually worked out for me. So ditched those pills, only took a couple of supplements, and just focused on giving my body just what it needs, and then leaving out the rest.
Okay. And how old were you at that time?
So I would have just turned 24 years old.
Okay. And so you go to see the doctor, they put you on a protocol, you decide to kind of do your own thing. How long was it after that until you started to really hit a baseline and feel normal?
It was probably 2 months I started to leave my house and go out, into the sunlight, but with shades on.
Wow.
And for about 3 to 6 months after that first 2 months, I was still, doing something functional, like walking around, being outside in reality. But then I'd also put myself on timeout for 20 or 30 minutes in darkness to like do a quick, reset. NSDR is now called, but really just kind of like a meditation to sit still.
Yep.
And so I would do that every hour of every waking hour of every day for a few months, and then slowly titrate that back down to 5 minutes an hour until
Okay.
the point where I could go a couple of hours without being symptomatic. And so it took probably a good 6 months where I felt normal, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're normal," which, there's still symptoms, there's still things there. There's probably a solid 2 years before I felt totally baseline again. But, the first couple of months were quite the grind in an odd sense.
And just briefly to define NSDR and non-sleep deep rest, something Huberman, really evangelizes. Just curious, like, how are you applying that in your situation?
So my goal was really just to turn off everything as much as possible, which it's very hard to do from a meditative standpoint. Your mind wants to grab on things and play with things. And so NSDR is typically like a body scan because it gives your mind something to play with, but it's so simplistic that it's not working too hard.
Mhm.
And so I would just go in a dark room for, 10 minutes, 15 minutes and try to turn off as much as possible. So if that's a scan, if that's counting down from 100 slowly every breath or whatever the case. And so at the time, again, I didn't know what NSDR was. I wasn't given a meditation to do. These TBI doctors were saying, try to, give yourself a timeout. Right. And so I just kind of crafted my own thing that felt good and made sense.
Awesome. Really appreciate that. So how long was that period then post injury to again like some sort of recovery? Because again, revisited the accident, years later with, EEG and Wavi. But what was that timing and what kind of caused once you had the baseline of recovery, what did that look like from a timing perspective? And then when did you decide to actually do another Wavi scan to check in on your brain?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I would say 5 to 6 months after the injury, I was back to working out again. I was, super functional. I was hardly putting myself on my daily timeouts. I was still very cautious and cognizant of how I was, treating my body, my brain, my
Mm,
energy levels. 5, 6 months, I was back in the game and you couldn't tell the
okay.
difference.
Physically, but now had you done any brain imaging at all then?
I
Or
hadn't done anything for seven
okay.
and a half years after the accident. So I didn't even know that EEGs existed to really see what's under the hood
Wow. Yeah.
until I was at this entrepreneur event in Austin, Texas. I was telling my story to this guy, and he was like, "Oh God, you gotta let my friend scan your brain. He loves this stuff." And he had a Wavi at his house.
Okay.
So the next day, he went to his house, scanned it, and then he introduced me to his brain doctor, who's a naturopath and a brilliant guy. His name is Dr. Brockenshire. He's incredible. He looked at the results, and I intentionally didn't tell him what was wrong with me. I just wanted to hear what he said, and he, really spelled out like you whacked the back of your head really hard. Here's what it did to your brain, and here's what we can do to kind of fix it. And so he provides some ideas of what to do. And I had access to a ID clinic in Chicago across the street from my apartment. And I was, taking this very seriously when he said you can, reverse this permanent brain damage. I almost started crying when he told me that because seeing what's still there is kind of, painful to look at because it reminds me of the pain I went through. And then also, tears of joy where there's still something you can do, even if it's many years later.
Yeah.
And so he just said, do some more NAD and glutathione that you're doing at the clinic. But the clinic just got a hyperbaric chamber. And I
Okay.
was very curious about that. I was like, what is this? Let me give it a try. So I was just like, what if I concoct all these three together and do them all at once and do some before and after of this Wavi brain scan? And that's what I did and saw some just dramatic changes in a matter of months.
Amazing. So, okay. So to recap, so 7 years later, you meet a colleague and they basically recommend doing a EEG, and you did the Wavi in particular. I've done the Wavi myself. I did it at a coffee shop here in Colorado. It took, maybe 10 minutes to get actually get the measurement, and then 20 pages of data that was generated out of that. And so, it's on the scale of brain measurement, Wavi's kind of like over here, it's not the highest resolution. You're not talking about QEEG or even some of the more advanced brain imaging, or of course like BCI. So it's generally lower resolution, but I think that's what's such an interesting part of your story is that this is something you can literally do at home. You can do it anywhere and you get the data immediately. And then you took that data, you ran it through, you said Dr. Brockenshire, and within like immediately he knew that there was an issue. You hit the back of your head. And I was just looking at the electrical activity essentially relative to the tissues, or what was kind of the high level from his interpretation?
Yeah, so it was very fascinating. It was almost like he was psychic, but he was just reading the data and telling he was basically telling me who I was and how
Yeah.
I operate without me telling him first. And so when he explained, how I react to certain sound or vision or sitting still with my eyes closed, he definitely was able to diagnose kind of my how I operate and what some of my hot buttons are. And so that told me, okay, this data is real and this guy knows how to read it.
Yep.
And so there's, a handful of different things you'll do. It's almost like brain games on an iPad, or it's just simply sitting still with your eyes closed, eyes open. Maybe there's like, dinging in each ear to see, how your brain responds to that
Yep.
sound. And so it's picking up on, your activity in certain states during certain challenges or stimuli and seeing how it's reacting in different ways.
Awesome. Okay. So you do the scan 7 years later, and you see that there's some areas that you can recover. So the protocol, it's threefold, is my understanding. You have glutathione, you have NAD, and then hyperbaric. Is that right? Those are the three, what we would call interventions, but those are the three major areas you guys were focused on. Now, where did that come from? Was that your own research, or you were already on NAD and glutathione, or how did that come about?
So I filled out his like questionnaire so
Okay.
he knew the types of things I was doing. I was already doing NAD and glutathione by injection or IV
Mhm.
at this clinic. And so he was like, these are actually really great. You should keep doing these, do them more. And then I mentioned, that this clinic just got hyperbaric and I want to explore that,
Yeah.
for this purpose. And instead, if you can get your hands on that, that would be huge. Give it a try. And so I got 30 sessions and just did them all back to back across 2 months, whatever it was.
Okay.
Them with the glutathione NAD because the hyperbaric is going to be, stimulating the healing and wound healing throughout the body inside and out. And you have the NAD to repair the damaged cells, and the glutathione is a vacuum to pull out the, inflammation and damage and toxins.
Awesome. And so that was, you did the pre-analysis, and then it was how many, 2 months later, 3 months later, you did your next EEG scan?
I think the EEG scan was probably 5 or 6 months apart because it was no longer in Austin, so I had to find someone else to do it.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so
Was it also a
and
Wavi or a different device?
also Wavi, because I wanted to have, the best side by
Yeah,
side A/B testing as possible.
100%.
And so I think that the protocol was probably 2 or 3 months long to finish all those sessions. And then the separation between the tests was 5.5, 6 months,
Hmm.
something like that. So it
Cool.
was a really short period of time, to be honest.
Wow. Okay. And so you get your next Wavi scan 6 months later, and then what did that look like?
It was incredible. I mean, there's a lot of graphs where I don't know what they are until he tells me. And then there's like the graphics where it's kind of just gives you like a visual of what's going on.
Sure.
The initial graphics that you see out of the gate, there's one image that kind of shows brain activity of the brain. And let's just say, the red areas are like high power, the Wi-Fi working there. And then the blue area is the damage where it's kind of like dead Wi-Fi.
Hmm.
So the first scan, it looked like a Pepsi symbol or logo because the back of my head was just super blue
Wow.
everywhere. It looked really bad. And then, 6 months later, this next scan, I'd say more than half of that blue dissipated, 8 years later, which is super powerful in itself.
Okay.
Another thing I was worried about was CTE symptoms.
Yep.
And then that was something he was looking for as well in those graphs. That first scan, there's a graph or an image of beta waves during certain tests. The first scan was like borderline psychosis. This was like an indication of oncoming CTE is very bad.
Wow.
And then 6 months later, it completely calmed up to a very, relaxed Zen state brain, which is actually funny because the second test I did, the guy running the test was like talking to me and stressing me out while I was doing the test. So that's a testament to how relaxed I still was in a stressful state. And so there was a lot of different things throughout the results that showed a dramatic difference of not only just the healing, but operations of my
Mm,
brain during certain types of stimuli.
of course. Very cool. Are you aware of any clinical trials or research studies that have been done around NAD, glutathione, hyperbaric?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I'd imagine there are, and I hope there are. And I'd love to, add what I can because they're so, so powerful. And hope through you guys that more people can find out about it. But I don't personally know of any trials out there.
Cool. So have you done EEG since? Any follow-ups?
I did another one, maybe another 6 months later, and I wanted to just double check. Like, am I still in the same place? Did I digress? Because I'm not doing a bunch of hyperbaric. And nothing retracted, nothing went backwards. So I want to see, like, do I have to be doing hyperbaric every year or something? Another 6 months later, it was very stable in the same place. There was probably a little bit of improvement in other areas, but nothing retracted, which is great. So since it looked quite stable, I've not done one since that third test, but I still follow the protocol. I
You
actually
do.
have a medical grade HBOT
Yep.
tank in my basement that I
Awesome.
love. It's just made dramatic differences to my, recovery scores,
Yep.
and everything else to follow. So I've become obsessed with it. And instead of buying a new car, I got a hyperbaric to chamber instead.
I'm gonna quote you on that. That is awesome, and
Priorities.
you're definitely our people. And so, are you still on HBOT and glutathione and NAD? Is that part of your daily
Yeah.
weekly
Um,
protocol?
I'm not doing glutathione NAD as much as I was at the time
Uh,
because I was really trying to like shotgun and like,
yeah,
let's make this work. But I still have them going at all times, at home. So I'll do NAD by injection, maybe like twice a week, glutathione 4 or 5 times a week. But just keep those going because I know how great they are for us.
yeah,
And we have so many environmental toxins coming in at all times that we can do our best to reduce them, but we also need
sure,
to help our body flush it out and rebuild.
yeah, 100%. Cool. What's your favorite wearable?
Favorite? So I mean, I use Whoop.
Yeah.
Uh, I've used it for 3 years,
Uh,
probably longer than that actually. And I've not used Aura because I was worried about like breaking it on a bar
oh,
at the gym or something. I don't think it would work, operationally.
yeah,
But I've heard great things about it. I've used Morpheus a little bit for HRV monitoring. So HRV is like a game to play.
sure.
Whoop is my wearable of
Okay,
choice.
awesome. And do you wear it 24/7? You sleep with it?
24/7,
Yeah,
as many hours in the day and as many days in the year as possible. Because the more
sure.
data you give it, the better
Yep.
more data you get.
Yep, I literally have one right here. I use Garmin for activity, actually. Usually that's my go-to is Garmin. I use Aura for sleep because it's slightly less invasive, and then I supplement with Apple Watch and Aura. I mean, sorry, and Apple Watch and Whoop. So that's kind of my
Awesome.
technology stack on the measurement side. And I think, Aura is probably the best for sleep.
Yeah,
It just depends. Whoop's
right.
awesome for all around, everything sleep and activity. But
Yeah, it's super helpful and just it's fun to unlock different things.
yeah,
Like finally got the hyperbaric chamber. That I don't think I had Whoop at the time that I was doing those protocols, but now the data is so clear where it's just like it's so cool to see a new protocol or a new practice, intermittent fasting, whatever you're doing. It's
yeah.
cool to see.
Where do you usually find your information?
And that's a good question. I listen to a ton of podcasts
Mhm.
and also like get a lot of information from, anecdotal evidence. So I will hear about something. If it sounds logical, I'll try it and then just see how it works, both anecdotally and, through my work.
Yeah. Awesome.
But yeah, it's just a lot of podcasts and then just researching things online. If it's a supplement, I might go to examine.com. Um, Dan Garner is an incredible, coach. I think he's one of Sean O'Malley's coaches actually, but I looked at him for information, and he actually writes a lot of studies on NIH. So
Mhm.
if there's something that he wrote, I trust it. But there's a lot of guys out there that I follow, and then I just experiment.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. The idea of the self-directed protocol, I mean, that's really why we built Brain One initially. We have a database of, in this case, I think we're up to maybe 500 plus scientific papers we put into our AI and then generate summarization and then generate actual protocols people can follow. And that's one of our resources, but another are people like you, that are willing to share. I think your case is extremely extraordinary because you actually have the data to help support it, the pre and the post. Again, I hear kind of the gripe with Wavi is that, it's lower resolution relative to an EEG as opposed to QEEG and, the higher diagnostics. But the point being is that you were able to do this yourself, basically, get a interpretation, which is also an interesting part of the story because that is so critical to this. But then secondly, find someone else who could do the post and, basically assemble the data set yourself. So that kind of biological optimization process is what we hear about all the time. And, really, really appreciate your story, Tony. It's very, very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'd love to tell it just to provide inspiration and give people hope because someone has, a child is in that dark place that I've been. And if I can help anyone get out of that, neurological confinement, I'd love to do so.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, we're also working with professional football players who are dealing with the same thing, all the
Right.
way down. And so it's the everyday human. It's competitive sports athletes. Really, it's the full spectrum. But the goal for Brain One is to also help provide a system that can collect data, that can start to prove these things out and show the scientific validity. So, but very, very inspirational. Anything else you want to mention relative to your current work? Any other supplements you're focusing on? Anything interesting going on in that world?
Yeah, I mean, I always test things on myself and I'm getting blood work every 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
And something I've recently done is I found some heavy metals in my body. I had high mercury and high aluminum,
Mm,
which I think was from eating fish out of cans every day for too long.
yeah.
Since my brain injury, I've been eating a lot of fish for a long time. And then I, found these results. And so I had to do some research to find out what to do to take to properly get out of my system. I cleared it out, and then I was like wondering why nobody's selling, an all-encompassing complex. So I just launched one, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
So,
Uh,
environmental toxins are, of course, the talk of the town lately, and so finding something to address that is very exciting.
yeah. Amazing. I couldn't agree more. From the fragrances that we're breathing constantly to cleaning products to glyphosate to PFAs to BPAs, you name it. So that's definitely something we're actively thinking about. Relative to our diagnostics, we've integrated into a number of wearables, but we're also doing some interesting testing around vocal analysis and then environmental toxicity. So some
Sweet.
pretty interesting time series analysis we're doing actually right now and seeing with a vocal essentially recording every day and then comparing it to the biometrics and some of the blood data that we're getting. And so again,
Sick.
theoretically, you don't need an external diagnostic. You could literally do it right here through your phone in Brain One. That's the vision that we're working towards. And it's exactly to your point because, we are dynamic systems as humans and, these things change all the time. So while you could be super healthy now, it can change at the drop of a dime.
Yeah, exactly. God, what you guys are doing is so incredible, and I'm so stoked to watch you guys continue to grow. And it just, it's so powerful to know that no matter where your brain is at, any situation, it's never too late to fix it. You guys have it on lock.
Well, thank you, Tony. And your story is paramount to this, quite literally. Your story, the protocol, but also the fact that, again, you even have the data around it. So very inspirational. And really, thank you for your time.
Awesome, man.
All
Good
right.
to see you. Locked in.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Tony. Thank you, everyone. This is Thorin at Brain Fitness One. You will find in the notes links to Tony as well as his protocol on Brain One and in a way you can get into contact. Thank you so much. Take care.